The chandelier light fell across the marble floor of the Grand Civic Ballroom, and beneath all that gold, a 6-year-old girl sat alone. Her name was Mia. Navy dress, hands folded, eyes fixed on nothing. She had learned that the best way to exist in her mother's world was to take up as little space as possible. 10 feet away, Claire Whitmore, 38, CEO of Whitmore Group, stood with champagne and calculated charm, working the room she had spent weeks engineering. Then a stranger crouched to Mia's eye level and raised his hands, and the little girl who never spoke smiled. Claire Whitmore had built everything she owned on a single principle. If you want something done, do it yourself, and do not make a production of needing help. She had grown up the second daughter of an insurance salesman in Naperville, had put herself through Northwestern on scholarships and part-time work, and had spent the decade after graduation climbing from junior leasing agent to founder of her own firm. Whitmore Group now managed $400 million in Chicago commercial property. She had done it while married, then while divorcing, then while raising a child alone. She had not stopped for any of it. Mia had been diagnosed at 8 months old. Congenital bilateral sensorineural hearing loss, complete, permanent. The audiologist had been kind. Claire had listened carefully, gone home, and made a list. Best specialist, best school, best speech therapist in the city, 3 afternoons a week. She had bought every book, attended every conference, explored every option that money and discipline could reach. She had done all of it except one thing. She had not learned sign language. Every time she approached that decision, something inside her turned away. The doctors had mentioned cochlear implants, had used words like intervention and outcome and possibility. Claire had held onto those words the way a person holds a rope over open water. Learning ASL felt like letting go of the rope. Like admitting her daughter would never hear, never speak, never cross back over into the world Claire had built and understood. She told herself she was keeping options open. She had been telling herself that for 6 years. Ethan Cole had grown up in Evanston, son of a shop teacher and a physical therapist. He had studied mechanical engineering at the University of Illinois, gone to work for a large construction firm downtown, and been genuinely good at it. He had met Dana at a friend's wedding when he was 26. She was 25, an elementary school teacher, born deaf, and the most direct person he had ever encountered. They were married 18 months later. He had started learning ASL before the engagement, not because she asked him to, but because he wanted to actually talk to her, not manage a conversation. Talk. It had taken 2 years to reach real fluency, and in those 2 years, something had changed in him that he couldn't fully articulate except to say. Once you learn to speak a language that isn't native to you, you start to see all the places where silence was being used as a substitute for effort. Dana died 3 years ago. Black ice on Dempster Street, a January morning, a truck that crossed the center line. Owen had been 6. Ethan had taken 3 months away from work and then returned to find he could not go back to an office. He earned his building systems certification, built a maintenance contract client list, structured his days around being home when Owen got off the bus. He still signed with Owen every single day. It was not about practicality. It was about keeping a language alive in their house that had belonged to someone they both loved. The night of the Whitmore Group gala, Ethan had been called in at 4 in the afternoon to repair an HVAC fault in the basement mechanical room. He was done by 6:30. He packed his tools, took the service elevator up, and was crossing the edge of the ballroom toward the exit when he saw the little girl in the navy dress sitting alone, with her hands in her lap, and stopped. He had not planned to stay. He set down his tool bag and walked toward her anyway. He crouched to her eye level, not bending from above, but coming all the way down, knees on the marble, making himself small enough that she would not have to look up. He raised his hands. "What is your name?" Mia stared at him for 1 full second. Then her face opened like a window. She raised her own hands, small, quick, certain, and signed back. "My name is Mia." "What is yours?" They were still talking when Claire saw them. She had been across the ballroom, mid-sentence with an investment partner, when something at the edge of her vision made her turn. She saw first that someone was crouched beside Mia's chair. Then she saw that Mia was animated in a way Claire almost did not recognize. Hands moving, eyes bright, leaning forward with the body language of a child who is exactly where she wants to be. Then she understood that she could not read a single word of what her daughter was saying. She excused herself and crossed the room. Her heels were precise on the marble. Her face was composed. Inside, something was tightening in a way she would not have been able to name. The man was dark-haired, broad-shouldered, in a gray dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. He was watching Mia with his complete attention, responding to her in fluid, practiced signs. Mia was laughing a real laugh, sudden and unguarded, the kind Claire sometimes forgot her daughter was capable of. They were talking about something. Claire had no idea what. She stopped 2 feet from the table. "Excuse me. Who are you?" He looked up without startling. He stood, slowly, giving Mia's shoulder a brief and easy touch as he rose, the touch of someone accustomed to moving in and out of a child's space without disruption. "Ethan Cole. I'm with Precision Systems. I handle the building maintenance contract here. I was leaving when I noticed she was sitting alone." He said it plainly, without apology, without an excess of explanation. You can't approach someone's child without their parents' knowledge. "You're right," he said. He held her gaze. He did not add anything to soften it or retract it. Claire looked at Mia. Her daughter had gone still, watching the two of them with the careful attention of a child reading the temperature between adults. But she was still present, still here, eyes alive in a way she had not been for the 2 hours prior. Ethan signed something to Mia, quick and quiet. Mia's shoulders came down from their brief tension. "What did you tell her?" Claire asked. "That you're not angry at her. That she didn't do anything wrong." Claire held that for a moment. She looked at her daughter's hands, which were resting open on the table now, easy and relaxed. She looked at her daughter's face. "I appreciate that," she said. And she meant it. And she hated that she had to mean it in front of him. Mia looked at Ethan. She raised one hand and signed something short. "She's asking if she can see me again," he said. Claire did not answer immediately. She looked at Mia, looking at her patient, already braced for whatever the answer was going to be. "I'll think about it," Claire said. Mia nodded. She folded her hands back in her lap. That small, practiced gesture, the resignation in it. The years of practice landed somewhere in Claire's chest that she was not prepared for. Ethan picked up his tool bag. He placed a business card on the table in front of Claire without ceremony. "In case," he said. He did not elaborate. He left. Claire stood with her daughter and the card and the noise of the party filling in around them, and she did not pick up the card for a long moment. When she did, she put it in her purse without deciding what that meant. 4 days later, Ethan was back at the building. The return visit was routine final systems verification, sign-off on the repair documentation, an hour of work in the mechanical room, and another 20 minutes at the building manager's desk off the lobby. He was not thinking about the woman from the gala. He was thinking about whether Owen had remembered to return his permission slip when the elevator opened and Claire Whitmore walked out, moving fast with a folder under her arm. Already 3 steps into the lobby before she saw him. She stopped. He stopped. They exchanged the brief pleasantries of two people who have met once under unusual circumstances and are still deciding what that means. Claire said she hoped the repair had held up. He said it had. She shifted the folder. He picked up his clipboard. Then, before she turned for the elevator bank, she said, "She talked about it. Mia. She said it the way someone offers information they weren't sure they were going to offer. The dog on your sleeve. She told me his name was Bruno and that he was her favorite color." A pause. I didn't know what she meant at first. Something in Ethan's expression shifted. She remembered that. She remembers most things, Claire said, and for just a moment the professional register softened before it returned. "I thought you'd want to know." The elevator opened. She stepped in. The doors closed. Ethan finished his paperwork and drove to pick up Owen from school. In the van, he sat for a moment before starting the engine. He thought about a 6-year-old storing up the name of an embroidered dog on a stranger's sleeve and finding a way to pass it along. He thought about Dana. He started the van. That evening, Claire sat at the kitchen island with her laptop open and a glass of water going flat beside it. The quarterly lease renewal projections were in a folder she had not touched. She opened a new browser tab and typed, "How to learn American Sign Language for adults." The results came back immediately. Courses, programs, certifications. She clicked the first article and read, "Most adult learners could expect basic conversational fluency in 6 to 12 months with consistent practice and full fluency in 2 to 4 years. She sat with that. Mia was 6 years old. In 2 to 4 years, she would be 8, 9, 10, with 2 to 4 more years of sitting in rooms full of people moving around her in a language she could not access. Claire closed the article. She did not close the tab. Her assistant Sandra had worked for her for 4 years and had learned not to editorialize. The following morning, going over the calendar, Sandra mentioned a smaller donor dinner at the end of the month, 40 people, informal, the kind of event where bringing Mia would read as intention rather than instability. And if Claire wanted, she could extend an invitation to the building contractor and his son. Sandra said it without emphasis and moved to the next item. Claire did not respond to the suggestion directly. She said to block the evening for Mia and they would work out details. She did not tell Sandra to send the invitation. She did not tell her not to. That night she opened the browser tab she had not closed. She read further into the article about immersion, about commitment, about the difference between learning a language to manage it and learning a language to live in it. She read about a woman who had started learning ASL at 42 after her grandson was diagnosed, who said the hardest part was not the vocabulary, but the moment she stopped thinking of it as translation and started thinking of it as a place she was actually going. She read for 20 minutes. Then she closed the laptop and stood in the doorway of Mia's room, watching her daughter sleep. The business card was still in her purse. She had not thrown it away. 2 weeks after the gala, Claire texted Ethan and asked if he had time to talk. He said yes. She suggested coffee near her office. He countered with a diner by his son's school linoleum floors. Decent pie, nobody she would know, and she agreed. She was there first. She ordered coffee and reviewed nothing. When he arrived in jeans and a canvas jacket and settled into the booth without ceremony, she said what she had come to say. She wanted to hire him to teach her ASL. Private instruction, 2 sessions per week. She would pay double whatever his standard hourly rate was. She was a fast learner. He looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up his coffee and said, "No." She hadn't expected that. Not the word itself. She had mapped contingencies for negotiation, for hesitation, for a counteroffer, but the texture of it, flat and unhurried, with nothing underneath it that wanted to be talked around. "I'm not underpaying you," she said. "I said double. It's not about the rate." He set the cup down. "ASL isn't a service I provide. I learned it because I wanted to be in my wife's world. I can't charge someone for that." He said it without apology, the way a person states a position they've already settled. Claire kept her face still. She was accustomed to closed doors. She was not accustomed to closed doors with no visible mechanism for opening. She began to gather herself to leave. He said, "But I'd teach you for free." She stopped. "My wife Dana was born deaf. The first 2 years we were together, I could sign well enough to manage maybe 40% of a real conversation. I spent those years feeling like I was always standing just outside the room she was actually living in." He was looking at the cup, not at her. "I committed to it properly in year 3, not because she asked me to, because I was tired of being outside." He looked up. "I'll teach you at no cost, but only if you're doing it for Mia, and not because it solves something else for you. I would know the difference." The diner noise filled the space between them. Claire thought about what an honest answer to that condition would look like. She thought about Sandra's suggestion and the investor meeting next Thursday and the way professional calculation had become so automatic that she sometimes could not tell anymore where it ended and something genuine began. "I don't know yet exactly why I'm doing it," she said. "That might not be what you want to hear." He considered it. "It's honest," he said. "I'll take honest." She drove home in the dark, the city moving past the windows. She was thinking about what he had said, not the offer itself, but the thing underneath it. The idea that you could spend years standing just outside a room, not because the door was locked, but because you hadn't finished learning how to open it. She parked in the garage and sat in the car for a moment, with the engine off. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. Inside, something had already shifted, a small, irreversible thing, even though she hadn't said anything aloud to confirm it. She went inside. Mia was still awake, sitting on the floor of the living room with a book spread open in front of her, one finger tracing the illustrations. Claire sat beside her for a few minutes without saying anything. Mia looked up, signed something short. Claire caught the shape of it, but not the full meaning yet, and went back to her book. It was enough. It was more than they'd had a month ago. Later, after Mia had gone to bed, Claire stood in the doorway of her daughter's room for a moment, watching her sleep. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, pulled up a video on her phone, volume off, screen tilted away from Mia's face. A woman demonstrating the sign for I love you. Claire watched it twice. Then she raised her own hand and tried to replicate the shape. Wrong. The fingers didn't hold. She tried again. Closer. She tried again. She sat there in the dark for 9 minutes, practicing a hand shape that no one was awake to see. She got it right, then wrong, then right again, then right 3 times in a row. She sat still for a moment after that, hands still raised, the room quiet around her. She had spent 6 years managing the distance between herself and her daughter, with money and logistics and the best professionals her income could access. She had been very good at managing it. She had never once asked herself whether managing it was the same as crossing it. She lowered her hand. She turned off the phone. She sat in the dark a moment longer before she stood and went to bed. The following Saturday, Claire brought Mia to the East Side Public Library at 10 in the morning. She had framed it to herself as practical. Mia needed peer contact with other ASL users, and Owen Cole was 9 years old and had been signing since he was 3. The library was neutral ground, a public place, nothing that required explanation. She had repeated all of this to herself on the drive over, while Mia sat in the back seat with her hands quiet in her lap, looking out the window. Owen was waiting near the entrance, dark-haired like his father, in a sweatshirt and holding what appeared to be a complete illustrated encyclopedia of prehistoric animals. He shook Claire's hand when Ethan introduced them, a solemn, slightly formal gesture that was immediately undercut by the fact that he was 9 and wearing a shirt with a cartoon pterosaur on it. He turned to Mia, signed something, and Mia looked at him for exactly 2 seconds before signing back, and then they both turned and walked into the stacks without waiting for anyone. Claire watched them disappear. She doesn't usually do that, she said. Owen either, Ethan said. Coffee carts near the periodicals. They found a table by the window with a sightline to both children, who were already on the floor in the picture book section with the encyclopedia open between them. The coffee was bad, they drank it anyway. Ethan talked about Dana, not in the way grief is sometimes performed, with careful pauses and grief language, but the way a person talks about someone they knew in full. Dana's opinions, offered freely. Her refusal to treat deafness as something requiring apology. The way she had found his early ASL attempts both touching and genuinely terrible, and corrected him without softening it because she understood that softening it was for his comfort and not for hers. Being corrected honestly, he had come to understand, was a form of being taken seriously. Did you ever feel left out? Claire asked. When she was with other deaf people and you were still behind? He thought about it. At the beginning, yes. There were conversations I was half inside. It bothered me more than it should have. He watched the 2 kids. Then I understood. The issue wasn't that Dana was excluding me. It was that I hadn't finished learning my way in. Those were different problems. Owen appeared at their table. He looked at his father, then at Claire, then signed something to Ethan, a full sentence. Delivered with the directness of a child who has not yet learned to route questions through social filtering. Ethan paused for just a moment before translating. He wants to know why Mia's mom didn't sign with Mia at the party. Claire looked at the boy. He was watching her with open, uncomplicated curiosity, not judging, genuinely asking the thing that had presented itself to him as a reasonable question, because in his world, where both his parents had signed, and the language had simply been part of how you talked to someone you loved, the question was reasonable. She looked past Owen to Mia, who was still in the stacks, bent over the encyclopedia, her finger tracing an illustration of something enormous and long extinct. For the first time in a long time, Claire could not find an answer that sounded like anything other than the truth. I was still learning, she told Owen. I should have started a long time before I did. He accepted this with a small nod, the matter-of-fact acceptance of a child receiving an honest answer, and went back to the books. Ethan did not say anything. He let the silence stand, which was its own kind of statement. Claire kept her eyes on her daughter. Mia turned a page. She traced another image. She was completely absorbed, completely at ease, in the company of a 9-year-old she had met 40 minutes ago, and the ease of it was the most clarifying and most difficult thing Claire had witnessed in years. She picked up her coffee cup. She set it back down without drinking. The information moved the way it always moves in a professional world, not through malice, but through proximity, through the ordinary habits of people who observe and talk. Within 3 weeks, the fact that Claire Whitmore had been meeting the building maintenance contractor outside of any professional context had passed from one executive assistant to one department head to one board liaison, and from there it reached Marcus Hale. Hale was 57, methodical, and had spent 2 years building a quiet case for a merger that would absorb Whitmore Group into a larger regional conglomerate. He had not moved on it yet because Claire's numbers were too strong to challenge directly. What he needed was something else. He called a check-in meeting. No advance agenda. He spoke, in the careful language of a man who applies pressure without leaving fingerprints, about perception, leadership, visibility. The way an executive's personal choices were inseparable, in the minds of major investors, from the institutional reliability of the firm. He did not tell her what to do. He described the landscape in enough detail that the path he expected her to take was clear. Claire listened to everything without interrupting. She thanked him for his candor. She left the room. In the women's restroom on the 32nd floor, she stood at the sink and looked at herself in the mirror. She was not thinking about the meeting. She was thinking about Mia's hands folded in her lap at the gala, the practiced quality of that stillness, and how long it takes a 6-year-old to develop it. She took out her phone and navigated to the Chicago Sign Language Institute. She had been looking at their intensive adult program for 2 weeks. She filled out the form, now 2 sessions per week, Tuesday and Thursday evenings, and submitted it before she could apply further analysis to the decision. Then she went back to her afternoon. Ethan learned about the situation not from Claire but from his operations manager, who called to mention that the facilities director at Whitmore Group had raised questions about the spring contract renewal. Nothing definitive, just questions worth being aware of. Ethan understood immediately. He stood in a hardware store parking lot and thought about it for a few minutes. He was not interested in doing anything strategic. He sent Claire a single text. "I don't need you to choose anything on my account, but Mia needs a mother who is learning whether or not anyone is watching." He put the phone away and went in for the parts he needed. Claire read the text at 11 that night. She was on the sofa with the enrollment confirmation email still open on her laptop. Screen her name, the course dates, the payment processed. She read the text twice, set the phone face down, and looked at the laptop. She had enrolled that afternoon in a restroom because Marcus Hale had made her angry. She was aware of that. She was also aware that the enrollment was still the right thing, regardless of what had preceded it. The problem with doing the right thing for complicated reasons was that the reasons didn't change what the thing was. She thought about the image that kept returning to her uninvited. Mia's hands folded in her lap at the gala. The practiced resignation of it. A 6-year-old who had learned, over years of quiet evidence, to expect that the people around her would not meet her where she was, not because they were cruel, because they were managing things, because the distance was easier to maintain than to cross, and the people on the comfortable side rarely notice what it costs the person on the other. Claire had provided for her daughter at every level that money and logistics could reach. She had managed the situation with skill. She had never once crossed it. She picked up her phone and did not reply to Ethan's text. She looked at it once more and then put it face down and opened the course schedule for the coming month. She was starting Tuesday. The meeting she had that evening was going to be moved. It would stay moved every week after that, for as long as it needed to. Owen's birthday fell on a Saturday in early November. He was turning 10. He had declined the offer of a trampoline park in favor of something small at home. A few friends, a pot of chili, a chocolate cake. This was so completely Owen that Ethan hadn't tried to talk him out of it. Claire had replied to Ethan's text 3 days after receiving it, in 2 sentences. "I read it several times. We'd like to come to Owen's birthday if the invitation is still open." Ethan had written back one word. Saturday. Claire brought Mia. She left her phone in the car in the driveway, not as a gesture, just as a quiet decision she made before getting out. Mia had been dressed an hour early and had chosen the book she was giving Owen with the focused deliberateness of a child who takes giving seriously. The afternoon arrived easily. Mia and Owen and 2 of his friends spread out in the backyard, their signs moving quick and natural between them, laughter breaking through. Claire sat on the back steps with Ethan and coffee that was better than the libraries. And for the first time, they talked about nothing in particular about a band they had both followed in their 20s without knowing it, about a hiking trail outside Madison he had always meant to take Owen to, about the specific cruelty of Chicago winters. At one point, Claire said something that made him laugh. And the ease of his laugh, the afternoon, the total absence of any agenda between them caught her off guard in a way she did not try to analyze. She was home by 7:30. Mia fell asleep in the car, and Claire carried her in and got her shoes off and sat on the edge of the bed watching her daughter's face in the dark. The book Owen had given Mia in return pressed into her hands at the door, accompanied by a sign Claire was almost certain meant "You'll like this one better," was still tucked under Mia's arm. Claire went downstairs and retrieved her phone. A financial news blog that tracked Chicago's commercial real estate sector had published a piece attributed to an anonymous industry source. The language was careful. It described, without naming her directly, concerns about leadership stability at a mid-sized firm whose executive was experiencing a period of divided focus. Sandra had already texted, "You should know this is circulating." Claire read it. She texted Sandra back, "Thank you." She turned off the notification for that publication. She sat at the kitchen table for a while without doing anything else, looking at the back door window and the dark yard beyond it, thinking about the afternoon on the steps and how little she had wanted it to end. In his house across the city, Ethan read the same article after Owen went to bed. He sat at the kitchen table with it for a few minutes. Then he went to Owen's doorway and stood there, and he told his son in ASL, the way they always talked when the day was winding down about the morning he had left his engineering job. No preamble, no lesson attached. He had sat in a meeting, looked around the room, and understood with unusual clarity that what he had and what he wanted were not the same thing, and that the distance between them was not going to close on its own. So he had stopped waiting. He hadn't lost anything. He had chosen something that mattered more. Owen, half asleep, signed back a question with one hand. "Is Mia's mom going to be okay?" Ethan looked at his son for a moment. He signed, "I think she's already figuring it out." Owen accepted this and pulled his blanket up. Ethan stood in the doorway a moment longer before turning off the light. He thought, walking back down the hall, about Dana. About her certainty, stated plainly and often, that people could surprise you if you gave them room. That the capacity to change was not something people lost so much as something they stopped exercising. That the difference between someone who changed and someone who didn't was almost never about ability and almost always about whether they could tolerate the discomfort of beginning. Ethan had watched Claire Whitmore begin, imperfectly, for complicated reasons, later than she should have. He had watched her begin anyway. Dana had a word for it. She had called it the threshold, the place where you stood before you were ready to walk through. She had not been impatient with him for standing there when he was still learning. She had simply waited on the other side and kept signing slow enough for him to follow. He had gotten there eventually, and when he did, the room he walked into was everything she had been living in all along. That, Dana would have said, was the part that counted. Marcus Hale's motion appeared on the board agenda under the heading Leadership Review Neutral Language designed to make a thing sound procedural that was not entirely procedural. He had the anonymous article, Investor Sentiment Concerns he had been quietly collecting, and 3 board members whose skepticism he had spent 2 months cultivating. He presented his case with the measured confidence of someone who believes he has already counted the votes. Claire had known it was coming for 4 days. She had prepared for it the way she prepared for everything, by working through every angle in advance and deciding, with precision, what she was and was not going to say. She had not prepared a financial presentation. She had not compiled updated performance metrics, though she had all of those and could have deployed them without effort. Instead, when it was her turn to speak, she opened her laptop and played a video. Mia's teacher had sent it 2 weeks earlier with a single line in the email. "Thought you'd want to see this." 41 seconds. Mia, standing in front of her class at Lakeside School for the Deaf, doing something she had not done before this month. Introducing herself to a room full of her peers. Signing her own name. Her posture was straight. Her hands were steady. Her eyes were up and on the room. The confidence in it was not the loud kind. It was the kind that comes from having been seen from a child who had begun to understand, slowly and without anyone announcing it, that the person closest to her was finally learning to show up. Claire closed the laptop. She said, for 12 years, she had run this company on the conviction that emotion was a liability and that the best leadership was the kind that kept everything at a clean remove. She had been effective at it. Effective was not the same as right. The man that some members of this board had concerns about had not taught her anything about commercial real estate. He had shown her, at close range, what the cost of perfect management looked like in the face of the person absorbing it. She said, she was not going to be a leader who had nothing outside these walls. She had been that leader for 11 years. She had the returns to show for it. She also had a 6-year-old daughter who had sat in rooms full of people who could not speak to her and had learned to fold her hands and wait. And Claire was not willing to be one of those people anymore. The room was quiet. The vote was 6-3. Hale collected his materials from the table with the composure of a man who had learned, over a long career, to absorb a loss without showing the impact. He did not speak to Claire on his way out. She stayed in the empty boardroom for a few minutes after the others left. She stood at the window. November light on the city below, the lake gray and wide in the distance. She was not thinking about the vote. She was thinking about Mia's hands in the video, steady, open, belonging entirely to themselves. She went out to the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. Ethan was there. He was sitting in one of the chairs near the reception desk, canvas jacket, keys in his hand, looking at his phone. He stood when the elevator opened. He said with the mild surprise of someone who had not engineered the coincidence, Owen's jacket. From the birthday. Someone said it might have ended up with your office's lost and found. Claire stopped in front of him. The lobby was quiet at this hour, a security guard at the far desk, the ambient hum of the building systems behind the walls. She raised her hands. It was not smooth. She had been studying for 6 weeks and knew exactly how much ground she had not yet covered. But she had practiced this specific sentence for 3 weeks in the car at lunch, in the kitchen after Mia went to bed, in the mirror on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. She signed it now, slowly and correctly. Thank you for not giving up on us. Ethan looked at her hands. Then he looked at her face. The expression that moved through his was not surprise, exactly. It was softer than that, closer to recognition, like something settling into a place it had been looking for. He smiled. The real version? Then he raised his own hands and signed back, plainly, so she would understand every word. I didn't do anything. You did. She looked at him for a moment, and then she laughed, quiet and surprised. The kind of laugh that comes when something lands exactly where it was meant to. The lobby hummed around them. Neither of them moved to leave. By the following spring, Claire's Tuesday and Thursday evenings were fixed. Sandra held them without exception. And on the rare occasion something came up, Claire moved the meeting, not the class. Her instructor at the Chicago Sign Language Institute was a woman named Patricia, mid-40s, sharp-eyed, no patience for the performance of effort as a substitute for effort itself. She had told Claire in the 3rd session to stop translating English in her head and start thinking in concepts. It had taken 4 more sessions to understand what that meant and another 6 to begin doing it. She was not fluent. She would not be fluent this year. What she had was presence inside the language, not translating, not converting, but inhabiting something difficult and choosing to stay in it. At home, the evenings had a different shape. Dinner without the television. Claire narrating her day in ASL, imperfect and sometimes wrong, and Mia correcting her with the calm patience of a child who has discovered her mother is finally showing up to something that matters. On Sunday mornings, they read on the couch, and sometimes Mia would sign a word she liked, and Claire would look it up and sign it back until she had it, and Mia would nod with the satisfaction of a teacher who has transferred something real. There was a vocabulary between them now that had not existed before. Small, imperfect, and entirely theirs. 1 year after the gala, the Whitmore Group Foundation held its annual fundraiser at the Grand Civic Ballroom. Same chandelier, same marble floor. Claire arrived with Mia beside her. Not across the room at a corner table, but beside her, their coats checked together, walking in together. Ethan and Owen arrived at 7. Owen was in a button-down shirt he had tucked in with visible reluctance. When he spotted Mia across the room, he signed something that made her press her hand over her mouth to keep from laughing. The 4 of them found a spot near the far windows. People came and went, colleagues, donors, a board member who wanted Claire's opinion on something. Owen held his own in every exchange, moving between speech and sign without drawing a line between them. Mia stood beside her mother, fully present, not waiting. Marcus Hale crossed their corner of the room at some point and nodded at Claire. None of the four of them watched him go. Near the end of the evening, Mia reached over and took Ethan's hand and signed something a full sentence, unhurried, certain. Ethan looked at Claire. He said quietly, "She wants me to sit next to you next time." Claire looked at her daughter. Mia was watching her with the patient expression of someone who already knows what the answer is. Claire raised her hands. She did not look at them. She signed, "Yes." Mia looked at Owen with the satisfaction of someone who has arranged something important. Owen rolled his eyes, but he was smiling.